It was the best of times. It was the worst at times. It was where I would buy my key comic books. Hey there, today I have an unboxing video, and in this video I'm going to open up a set of comic books that I won at auction from the comic book platform HipComic from the seller Infinity Comics. This was a resource that I used for a solid 2 years, maybe even longer, to find very specific key comic books in high grade that I had kind of avoided for a long time because the price was out of reach. The condition wasn't really what I was looking for. They weren't really available on online stores, and just for whatever reason didn't feel comfortable acquiring these books through eBay or some other means. And Infinity Comics became this place, a honey hole, if you will, where I was able to find these keys. And when I talk about high grade, it's relative. It depends on the scan. It depends on the skill of the grader at Infinity Comics and so on. And I talk a lot about nostalgia and how comic books are really kind of a time machine for me when I look at these specific books, and it really takes me back to when I was collecting as a kid or a younger version of myself. But now some of the nostalgia is really the stories around where you got the book and how you got it. And many comic books, too, if you're thinking about it just in terms of collectibles, it's really where did you track the collectible down? You know, there's a lot of stories around. I found this book in a dollar bin, and some of it is the collectible, the story itself, the creators. Maybe you met the creator, got a signature on a book. There's a lot of different ways to talk about your collectibles and those stories behind them. And one of those stories really is the acquisition, the chase, the thrill of the hunt. All of that is important to me as a collector. And I won't forget the comic books that I picked up at Infinity Comics. There's other stores as well that I've moved on from that I don't buy from anymore, or it's just super infrequent. Midtown Comics is an example of one of those that I just don't spend my money there really all that often, maybe once a year at most now. But then when I go back through my statistics, all of the data that I've kept track of, many 9.8s, slab 9.8s, came from Midtown. And so there is this sort of nostalgic feeling too around the acquisition. I want to show you the books that I won at auction. This was a auction from late 2024 when I had shifted away from trying to find more of a quantity of non-keys in high grade and found myself paying a lot for 25 to 30 auction wins and really feeling a little unsatisfied at the sheer volume of books around. Very fine. It just didn't really feel that great to add to my collection. And I shifted towards really like being laser focused on some bigger keys that I wanted to acquire. And this is a great example of my mindset in the second half of 2024. So I want to show you the books that I picked up at auction, all with very favorable listed conditions, but I'll be kind of the final judge as far as if any of these books can be improved with a clean and press, and if I want to have these books continue on their journey to try and maximize the ultimate condition and final grade if I were to send these books to CGC. If you stay to the end, I'll show you what the final bids were that I had to place to acquire these books. I know one in particular, Collector Auctions, I knew that he had been regularly looking at this one book in particular, and I had kind of used some of his past final bids to think about what I would need to step up to try and win one of these books. So that'll be fun too. And again, it's these stories, it's the acquisition. And with auctions, did I snipe this last second? Was I sniped on books? All of this stuff, it really just adds to my overall enjoyment and entertainment around the hobby. So let me show you which books I picked up from Infinity Comics. Okay, here is the shipment that I received from Infinity Comics. This was sent November 7th, 2024. Super helpful always that they add this "Please handle with care" sticker. I really think that the packages that have that label get kicked or really just kind of like thrown up on the porch or jammed into that mailbox. Nevertheless, it arrived almost like this nondescript package, this little treasure chest of comic books. So let me go ahead and open it up. All right, let's do this. Let's look at the, I believe, 7 comic books that I won at auction from Infinity Comics. And the first one up is Batman number 405, part 2 of the Batman Year 1 storyline by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli. Another absolute masterpiece of storytelling and art. This is the first appearance of Carmine Falcone, who is part of the crime family, this crime syndicate that has appeared kind of throughout the Batman mythos and timeline, has appeared on screen several times, and this is that character's first appearance. I've always loved this cover too, the color scheme with the purple and the white and yellow moon in the background. And this book, and all the books in this shipment, were all around somewhere between a VF minus and a VF plus. That was the listed condition. I do see a pretty nasty color break right here in the middle of the spine. And I didn't necessarily open up this order specifically looking for Frank Miller books, but he does have a signature series event and the deadline is coming up. And I don't really have any, I would say, books worthy of sending in for the signature series. This would have been one, but I just don't know if getting this book back in like a 9.4 with Mr. Miller's signature adds any really interest or desire on this book, especially since I won it at auction. I don't really have any real emotional ties to it. So this one may not grade out or have a chance, but had that tick not been there, and maybe it had some other pressable defects, I would have considered it. However, that Year 1 storyline, it's just super awesome. So whenever I see that book, in terms of like kind of targeting books, I would always throw up a bid on any Batman Year 1 books. Next is Captain Marvel number 14. This is from 1969, cover art by Frank Springer. And I always remember like seeing this book for the first time, not when it was released on newsstands, later on as a back issue, where it's like, wow, it's Iron Man. What's he doing out just kind of floating around in space? And for some reason, to me, it always looked like Iron Man was kind of wearing his pajamas. But anyway, Captain Marvel, kind of a sneaky Silver Age series where you can get books pretty easy to find and affordable. I don't believe this book is really anywhere near very fine, as it turns out. There's a number of color breaks, but I didn't think it was in too bad a shape just for the age of the book. And as an Iron Man fan, I thought, even looking like at the top edge here, it's pretty crisp. It's not bad. So it could be in the realm of maybe around a 7.0, possibly, or a 6.5, which again, like really being nostalgic and thinking before I was buying from Infinity Comics, I was buying on heritage auctions, and I would target Silver Age books in that 6 or 6.5 range because I thought I was getting pretty good value. So I decided to take a chance on that book as well. Next is Doctor Strange number 2. And just kind of like with first appearances, if you can't get the first appearance, get the second appearance. If you can't get the key, maybe buy around the key. If you can't get the first issue of Doctor Strange, then what I did was pick up issue number 2. Frank Brunner on cover art here, kind of an unofficial tie-in to Green Lantern, I believe. I think it was one of those back in the day where Marvel was having a little fun and Green Lantern somewhere in this issue, like passed out under a table or something. But I targeted this book specifically at auction because I thought it was undergraded. This has a miswrap, so what will happen with these, as you see the white cover here near the spine, this is the back cover that's been wrapped around during manufacturing, and what it does is it actually protects the spine from color breaking ticks. For example, like right here, it's very difficult to see, but there is a spine tick right here, but it's not as clear or as evident. And so the argument can be made, is it breaking color if there's an absence of color? And just for general eye appeal, as you kind of move it back, for the naked eye, you can't see those at all. It looks like a solid 9.8 candidate. Now, there's probably some pressable defects, but I thought this was in just tremendous shape, and it looks like it's holding up. Corners look really nice, just as you would expect. So I think right here, again, there's just a slight crease to the spine. And that would be kind of my expected grader notes if I were to send this book into CGC by itself, as they would say creasing to the spine, and probably give it somewhere around a 9.2, but maybe that's a candidate for a clean and press. So that one looks pretty good. The next one is Web of Spider-Man #1, also a book that anytime I see it, I'm going to click into the scan, I'm going to review the condition, scrutinize it, because my goal is to get this book in a 9.8. And wow, just looking at the condition here as I was talking about it, this could be it. Everything super sharp, all from edge to edge, corner to corner, super nice. I will have to take it out of the bag and board and check out the back cover, but I see a few just the tiniest of non-color breaking ticks in the spine, which should make this at least a candidate for a 9.8. I have struggled personally to find a 9.8 candidate that I would want to get graded. I did submit one for grading and it didn't grade out in a 9.8, and so I'm still chasing that down, and this could be that issue. Charles Vess cover art, just one of my favorite Spider-Man comics, because at the time when I was a kid, Amazing Spider-Man was the primary title. It's what everybody bought, and what I tend to do as a comic book fan, collector, is I will definitely indulge in the mainstream, but I also love to kind of define in my own way how I collect. And when I was a kid and I first started reading comics, everyone was reading Amazing Spider-Man. So I read Spectacular Spider-Man and Web of Spider-Man. I went back and also got Amazing Spider-Man, but was not the mega Marvel zombie Amazing Spider-Man fan at the time. And I never had Web of Spider-Man #1, so that particular issue is important to me to get in a 9.8. Another great Spider-Man book here. This is Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars #8. The super famous Mike Zeck symbiote black costume Spider-Man cover. The origin of the black symbiote costume. The costume that later bonds with Eddie Brock to become Venom. I'd love to have every issue of Secret Wars in a 9.8. This is also the book that I hinted at earlier where I would get outbid by collector auctions from time to time. And what I ended up doing through getting outbid by him was I kind of saw what the final bid was. And that prepared me for the next time this book came up. And this was the thing with Infinity Comics too, is it really did feel like they had an infinite inventory of not just comic books, but comic books like this. I don't know how many times I saw Secret Wars #8 come up for auction. So if I got outbid, I really didn't sweat it, because I just knew that another copy would come up at some point, and very naively would just put in a bid, get outbid, and then just wait for the next one. Do the same thing, get outbid over and over. And at some point I was like, I really have to make a serious attempt at getting this book. And so I used some of that data and some of the experiences of being outbid to go ahead and put in a bid that I felt would get me the book. And in this case, it did. Now, this one, if you've been staring at it while I've been, I forget what everybody said, pattering on, blathering on, all of the above, talking too much, whatever. It is slightly miswrapped. So the same comment on Doctor Strange 2 it goes for this book here. So from an eye appeal, like a purist perspective, it's not going to be the issue that maybe is the most sought after if someone's looking for like the perfect eye appeal on a 9.8. But structurally, aside from the miswrap, it does look very, very solid. There is one spine tick right by the Mike Zeck John Beatty initials here that's hard to see, but that exists. I don't think that would be too detrimental to the final grade. I think what's rough here, and have to see if this can be pressed out, is that sort of like paper rolling along the top. There's a good look at it. So that sometimes happens in manufacturing. That could be looked at as a human defect, potentially. They're not finger bends. I forget exactly what the precise collecting term is for that, but it's almost like the paper became bunched together at the top. Some of that could come out with a press, maybe a little humidity. It's possible that that could be improved, but it's also possible that it just remains. So we'll have to see what I ended up doing there. And then something very similar down here as well towards the corner. So it does feel like this book has been like super tight since 1984, kind of as is. Like, I don't believe this book was ever pressed. And I think, kind of regardless, it's probably a book that I will go ahead and submit all the way through. The colors on this looks really nice. A lot of times people will have displayed this and that orange fades really easily. So also want to make sure this comes back in white pages, and the colors are super strong on this one. So not the most perfect copy of Secret Wars number 8, but I think it has some potential there. The next book is Marvel Comics Presents number 72. This is the first issue in the Weapon X storyline, part of Wolverine's origin as Weapon X. And you have to remember, too, at the time, his origin was a complete mystery. That was part of the mystique of Wolverine, was he just sort of appeared. We didn't know much about him. We fell in love with him as a character, but Marvel had really kept a lot of his backstory under wraps, and that was part of the fun. And I remember that as a reader, always wondering, are they going to tell us who is Wolverine? Where did he come from? How did he get his powers? And so when we started to dive into that through the Barry Windsor Smith Weapon X storyline, it became very important. But these books didn't really take off in the way that a lot of other Wolverine keys did. And then I would say within the last 4 or 5 years, this book specifically popped as people were giving it attention for the cover art, and then also kind of tying in some of the Fox X-Men and Wolverine live action stories that were pulled back from the Weapon X storyline. And anyway, trying to maybe breathe some life into this storyline. It was always important from a story perspective, but never really had that level of collectability with other Wolverine books. Later on, Marvel actually created an Origins miniseries specifically that got into Wolverine's backstory. There was Old Man Wolverine, and they really did go ahead and start to talk about his origin and have stories available for that. But the whole weapons program, Weapon X, it all started here with this issue. And this looks to be a really nice copy. I did see a spine tick kind of pop in and out of the light here. Right around there is one. But again, just like Secret Wars 8, really great use of colors here. The colors really pop on this one. So really happy I picked that one up. That the condition on that one is super strong. The last book is another key book that I had been trying to track down for the longest time. I think that the live action version of this character didn't do it any favors, and I think it ultimately hurt the value of this book. But this was either number one or in every top 10 list for probably at least a solid year that I can remember. And of course, I FOMO'd really hard over it, and just it was a book that the value had jumped so high that I just knew that it wasn't really a book that was going to be on my radar. It wasn't going to be a book that I was going to track down. And whenever these books are super hyped, I try my best to just avoid them. You can't have every hot book, and sometimes you just have to let it go and move on and focus on other areas of collecting. And this was one of those cases. At the time that I bid on this book, it was definitely on its way down. And I think the value has slid even further, that if I were to pick it up now, 4 months later, I would probably be able to find it even cheaper. But at the time, I thought that it had lost a lot of value. It had come down within my budget. So I decided to go ahead and step up and place a bid to win it. And win it I did. And it is Star Wars Heir to the Empire #1, the first comic book appearance of Thrawn, Grand Admiral, to be specific and respectful to the character. Also, the first appearance of Mara Jade, another great Star Wars character, although the current Star Wars Disney has kind of erased some of the characters and stories and made them non-canon. That's a whole other debate, is whether or not they truly are, or if they've still borrowed from the extended universe. I won't get into it, but this book, it is an adaptation of the Heir to the Empire best-selling novel by Timothy Zahn. And I swear, this was like the hottest book of the moment when all of the Star Wars speculation was happening. And even as some of the Star Wars live action was disappointing, there was always the rumor that Thrawn was going to appear. And then he did appear, and he was not maybe as menacing or as manipulative or calculating, or just the this sort of like supreme empire dark side intelligence, he just kind of fell flat on the screen. And again, a lot of these comic books are tied to the success or failure of their live action counterpart. And so you kind of take the good and the bad with it. But in terms of the good and the bad, I want to zoom in on the condition of this comic. And a lot of these Heir to the Empire books, not just number one, they will have this what looks to be spine splitting all the way down. And so it's a little tricky there when you're examining it for condition. I technically and personally ignore it and just assume that's just manufacturing. I've seen a number of books look a lot worse than this get 9/8. That corner could be a problem or an issue right there. So I'm probably leaning 9/6 at this point. And also, at least through the bag and board here, and I have to make sure this isn't on the bag, but very, very subtle, although I don't even think I can see it here. I'll try and get it in the light. Right where my thumb is, it looks to have a couple of scratches going right in this direction near Thrawn's eye. Yeah, right there. That's a good spot where you can see it. And I think that's on the cover. So as I examine it, I'll take a look. I hope it's part of the bag, but as I'm moving the bag back and forth. I don't want to open it right now and get totally disappointed, but that could be it. It looks like three, almost like just fingernail or paper clip type scratches just going right in this direction. Right there, you can kind of see it, and I think it's on the book. So that's a tough one because this was the most expensive book in the set, and I want to go ahead and move forward and show you what I paid for it. And as I said, it was the best of times and the worst of times because this was kind of the roll of the dice. You're not going to see that on a scan. They don't really angle the books, and frankly, the scans and the whole process over there at Hip Comic, they've gotten worse. So I had to gamble and take a chance. That was my opportunity to pick up Heir to the Empire #1. Like I said, I could probably pick up another copy for a little bit of a better price at this point because the value continues to drop, but I acquired it nonetheless. And I'll show you that final bid that I had to place to ultimately acquire each of these books in this shipment. All right, here is the order summary for the 7 books that I won at auction from the comic book platform Hip Comic, from the seller Infinity Comics. It was a seller that I targeted many times and tried to eventually move towards bigger books and keys, which the 7 books here, you can see I was invoiced $400.05 for 7 comics. And what I found was I was more happy and satisfied spending this amount of money on fewer books, bigger books, more books that are important to me, rather than spending this amount for 30 comics that were just non-keys and just sort of filler that would end up grading out, between a 6.5 and a 7.5. So yes, the amount is high, but the very specific books I got, I'm very happy with. And you can see there are 2 big books here. Secret Wars #8, I had to bid $112.50. And what I noticed is Collector Auctions was bidding around $100 for this book. And so I knew that if I wanted to win, I was going to have to place a bid well over $100. And that's what it took to get this book at auction. Heir to the Empire, probably a little bit of an emotional bid. I really thought that was going to end up being a 9.8 candidate. I do remember even vividly going through the scans going, I don't see anything wrong with it. And that's the thing, is those light scratches, they just didn't show up on the scan. And my process here was certainly putting together those bid ranges for condition, potential improvement, other past books, the likelihood that the book would get a grade bump. I had all of that factored in so that I wouldn't overpay for a book. But what I ended up doing is I would fall in love with a scan. I would fall in love with the condition and think, okay, it kind of doesn't matter because the scan looks so good. It makes it look like the book has so much potential. And then I just had to have it. It was like, oh, I have figured this out. I have found the diamond in the rough. And then lo and behold, the book has scratches on the cover. And the thing is, with that cover of Heir to the Empire, it's like a semi-gloss, semi-cardstock. So it's not like it's just that Marvel paper that, you can just run it through a quick press and everything kind of comes out. So that's likely those are permanent scratches. I'll examine it and see if there's a chance or any reason to continue to submit it. But you can see I had to bid almost $126 to win that book, when the fair market value of it right now is $67. This is a multi-$100 book from just a few years ago that has really, really fallen. Many of the Star Wars books have followed this trajectory and this steep decline. Secret Wars number 8, where I bid $112.50 for it, the cover price fair market value for that book in that condition, in a high grade, near mint range, $165. So a solid pickup there. Everything else, $20 range for Captain Marvel 14, Doctor Strange 2, Marvel Comics Presents number 72. And that kind of aligns with the fair market value. Marvel Comics 72 has dropped a bit. Captain Marvel, being Silver Age, is holding up at $39. Batman 405, $6.50 for that great year one book. Cover price has it at $27. And Web of Spider-Man number 1, again, kind of a book that I continue to fall in love with, $45.44 to win that book at auction. It is a $29 raw book according to cover price. Now, if I examine the total cost for these books and compare it to the raw value, the cover price fair market value, you can see it's a loss of $32.05. So overall, not terrible. And it's Secret Wars number 8 that's really kind of holding up the value and the positivity around this order. And Heir to the Empire is really kind of dragging it down. Batman 405, $18.40 of raw value added to my collection. Captain Marvel 14, $12.89. And it does look like a little bit of an overbuy on Web of Spider-Man number 1. Now, I don't pretend that these books are all 9.4. You can see their listed condition here on some of these: very fine plus, very fine minus, all the way down. As I said, these were kind of the conditions that I was targeting. Really tried to stay away from no lower than very fine minus. And I really couldn't tell the difference if a book was listed in near mint minus, or very fine plus. To me, they all kind of looked the same in terms of condition. And that's really how, when I would get the books back in my possession, they would show up. So as far as any potential CGC grade, let's just throw an 8.0 grade on all of these, and maybe that's the Infinity Comics near mint, where the Mile High Comics near mint is 8.5 to 9.2. This to me is kind of the Infinity near mint, and you can see it in 8.0. The raw value add switches, the Heir to the Empire value drops even further, the CGC value drops, and if I were to send all of these books as is to CGC, there's a good chance that they would come back 8.0, maybe 8.5, 9.0 on some of them. But what's ultimately fun for me is to flip these to 9.8 to just see what is the overall potential of these books in the highest grade. And you can see the CGC value jumps to $1,904. Secret Wars number 8 in a 9.8, currently at $521. Captain Marvel 14 is not a 9.8 candidate. There are too many color breaks on that. There's too many other defects. Also, the cover appears to be a little dirty, so it's not getting that 9.8. But $872 for that book in a 9.8. And I don't mind acquiring these books in a little bit of a lesser grade if the 9.8 ceiling is super high, because a high 9.8 value is going to strengthen all of the lesser grades and kind of gradually pull them up over time. And also, all of these books in a 9.8 are $100 and above, which is also kind of a target metric that I use to determine if I'm going to bid on a book. I don't want to spend $25 on a high grade copy when the 9.8 grades out at like $85. I want to make sure that there's enough room between the grade that I was targeting, the potential grade that I saw, the potential improvement that I thought the book would have, and I wanted to make sure there was enough room for the book to grow into a better value. Not all the books are like that, but you could see Batman 405 and a 9.8 is $110, but only spent $8.60 to acquire it. So if that one were to get clean pressed and graded out, be it a nice CGC value add of $78 there, minus some pressing fees. Doctor Strange number 2 might be a sneaky value add here, $341 for that one in a 9.8. But yeah, a 9.8 for Heir to the Empire number 1 at $362. That book was selling raw for that much. and in a 9.8, I believe it was well over 1,000, and that's why I stayed away from that book. And I'd kind of really given up on it. A lot of these books I do tend to give up on. I just move on, and I find a lot of peace in that. And what had happened was the books kind of came back around. A lot of what I do with collecting keys, especially, is I just kind of wait. I wait for them to show up on my radar. I wait for them to show up at auction. And I'm kind of doing this now with the other sources that I use, Mile High Comics, My Comic Shop, a few others, where I will just check periodically and see, are there any books of value or books that have a certain condition or a scan that I'm super excited about, that I'm falling in love with the condition. And if they kind of present themselves in the moment, then I'm ready to kind of strike instead of trying to chase a specific book down. So a little bit of nostalgic here in terms of how I was getting books. I'm really hoping that Secret Wars 8 can be improved with the issues that I see around the top and the bottom edge of the comic. The Heir to the Empire #1, it is a bit of a disappointment, but I finally have the full set of Heir to the Empire collected, so that'll be great. And I still would maybe check the 9.4 or 9.2 grades just to see, maybe it would be worth my while. But if I run this through my decision engine logic, I'm going to be told I've already invested way too much. Let's just keep the book raw and look for a better copy down the road. What do you think about these books that I picked up at auction? Did you use Infinity Comics in the past? Do you use them now? Do you see a difference like I do? There were times where they were definitely disappointing. I'm definitely disappointed in Heir to the Empire, but still happy with my experience from the perspective of, I remember prepping for this auction, getting ready to bid, putting in my bids, watching the bid live, having my max bid ready to go so I knew what my limits were. And part of that fun was certainly entertaining. It was part of the hobby for me at the time. And that time has passed. And now I'm collecting and acquiring books in a different way. So it was a lot of fun to open this shipment up finally and see a couple of big keys and these other books that mean a lot to me. Thanks for watching. Happy collecting, and see you next time.